Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. My name is Samriddhi Rajal, and I'm the training officer for the KBA Secretariat. In today's session, we will be going over the process of how reviews actually take place and how to interact with the regional focal point and the Secretariat through the WDKBA proposal portal. So just some general housekeeping before we actually begin. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. So I think none of you have turned on your videos. That's fine. I'll be turning my video off after going over the learning objectives so that everyone can see the entire screen right now, and also when we post the recording on YouTube as well. If you have any questions, then feel free to raise your hand or simply unmute yourself and just ask the questions at the end of each section. There will be a 5-minute break after two sessions or two sections. And the reason I'm saying two sections is because the first two are actually the longest. So the break is probably going to be about 60 or 70% of the way through. So yeah, you feel free to ask questions at that point as well. If your microphone doesn't work or you just don't want to speak, you can feel free to post your questions and comments in the chat box as well. But please be aware that I may not be able to see or read the messages immediately after you send it. And at the end of the webinar, I will post a link to the feedback form as well, so that you get your chance of telling us how we did and how we can improve these sessions. So yeah, with that, welcome to the last and third of the 3-part webinar series on using the online proposal portal in the World Database of Key Biodiversity Areas, WDKBA, to propose assessments. In February, we had 2 sessions in which I went over, so in the first webinar, I went over the what is expected and how to actually navigate the KBA guidelines. And then in the second webinar, I went over what type of information is required in each of the mandatory fields of the proposal. So that was the 2 that took place in February. In this session today, the last session of the series, I will begin with an overview of the review process and then go over what happens once you actually propose an assessment. So the purpose of this webinar is to help set expectations about the KBA review process, the actors involved at the different stages, and then also how to use the comments tool to communicate with the regional focal point or the Secretariat, and then finally how to update your proposal as required. With that being said, the target audience for this session are prospective proposers and or NCG members, experts who may have started collecting data and or have submitted their proposal and are wondering what the rest of the process looks like. So by the end of the session today, you should be able to outline the feedback process, explain how the comment tool works in the WDKBA proposal portal, actually use the comment tool to respond to feedback, identify the common issues in proposals, and then finally articulate solutions to common issues. So before we move on, like I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna turn off my video so everyone can see the entire screen. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned in the previous webinars, the KBA proposal process itself has 5 main stages, and it could be linear. So you basically go through each step with no additional comments, or it could be iterative. So you may receive some feedback and comments at the review stage, and you'll have to address these before you can move on to the nomination stage. And then you may receive some additional comments in the nomination stage that you will need to address before the proposal can move on to the confirmed stage. So in the next few slides, I will briefly go over the 3 stages in the middle of the process. So the proposal, review, and nomination. In the proposal stage, you will have collected data from primary and secondary sources, consulted with stakeholders, delineated the site, and you'll also have prepared the proposal in the WDKBA, and then finally you'll also need to submit the proposal in the WDKBA. Once you've done that, in the review stage, the regional focal point will review the proposal and make comments on it, and then return it to you. Then you will need to address those comments and update the KBA proposal as needed. There might be, as I mentioned in the previous slide, there might be some back and forth between the regional focal point and yourself during the review stage. However, once all the comments have been addressed satisfactorily, the RFP will approve of the proposal, and this means that the proposal will be tagged as having been approved by the regional focal point, but the proposal itself will be returned to you. Then after their approval, after the RFP's approval, you will be able to nominate the site. When you nominate the site, the Secretariat receives it, and they will now be able to review the site to validate the information that you've provided. At this stage, the Secretariat may also have some comments on the proposal. If they have comments, then they will send it back to you. And then once you've addressed all of their comments adequately and updated the proposal to include all the relevant and requested information, the Secretariat will validate the proposal and then would move it on to the confirmed stage, because then they would forward it to WDKBA for publication. So today's webinar will focus on the practical steps of the tail end of the proposal stage, more or less the entirety of the review stage, and then just the beginnings of the nominations stage. So when I say the practical steps, specifically what I mean is that we will learn how to navigate the WDKBA to address the comments that the regional focal points and or the Secretariat may have. And one of the things that I would like to point out here is, as you can see in this figure here, during the review stage, there is some communication between the regional focal point and the proposer. And then once you get to the nomination stage, there will be some communication between the proposer and the KBA Secretariat. So what I wanted to stress here is that in the review stage, if you and the regional focal points have held discussions about an issue with the proposal, so basically there is an issue that the RFP has raised, you consult with them, you discuss it with them, and then you resolve the issue. When that happens, if you do not document the result of the discussions and basically like what the resolution of the discussions were in the proposal at this stage, then when you get to the nomination stage, the Secretariat might end up asking you the exact same questions. So for instance, if you're using more recent and accurate information compared to what is available in the IUCN Red List, you will need to justify that within the proposal in the relevant additional details fields. If you've just had verbal or email exchanges with the regional focal point, but that the result of those discussions isn't included in the proposal. When the proposal gets to the Secretariat, they will ask you for more information for the justification about why you're using information that isn't available in the IUCN Red List. So please include those sorts of details in the relevant section to minimize the back and forth between you and the Secretariat. And I mentioned this in the Proposing KBAs webinar as well. So if you would like a bit more detailed guidance on how to actually write those sections, then please refer to that recording. So proposing a site. So as I just mentioned in webinar 2, Proposing KBAs, I provided a step-by-step guide on filling out the tricky but mandatory fields in the online proposal portal of the WDKBA. In today's webinar, I will start from what happens when you click on the Propose Assessment button. So when you think you are ready to propose the assessment, you will simply need to click on the blue button labeled Propose Assessment at the bottom of the page here. When you click on it, if it turns out that you had not filled in all the mandatory fields, a pop-up box will appear, which will tell you which pages are missing the information. You will not be able to propose an assessment until you've filled all the mandatory fields. So if and when you get this type of pop-up, you will need to obviously click on the Continue Editing button and then provide the required information in the highlighted fields. So in this example, my assessment is missing some type of information in the About page, the Site Details page, and the Assessment page. So in the next 2 slides, I will show you how the missing information is highlighted in the About and Assessment pages, because there's slight differences between the two. So in the About page, as you can see, the mandatory fields that do not have the required information have been highlighted by a thin red border, and there is a caption that tells the user to please complete this field. So it's fairly unambiguous what the problem is and where the problem is. In the Assessment page, if the trigger elements are missing some information, then this red circle at the right end of the row highlights which species is missing information. So for example, all the required fields have been completed for the first species on this list, Answer Erythropus. So there is nothing highlighted at the end here. However, the species Ovibus muschatus is missing some information. In fact, this red bubble here is pointing out that there are 2 mandatory fields that have not been completed. To address this, you will simply need to click on the Assess button for that species, so Ovibus muschatus in this case. And then when you do, and when you scroll down a bit, you will see that the red circle with the number is next to the assessment parameter. So you will need to expand the global and/or site level data to see exactly where the information is missing. And then scroll down to identify where the issue is. Once you get to this point, you can see that the lack of information is highlighted in the same way as in the About page. So the empty fields are highlighted with a thin red border, and there's the please complete this field caption under both the fields that are missing information. Then, once you have filled in all the mandatory fields that were highlighted the last time, simply click on the blue button labeled Propose Assessment at the bottom of the page again. And then you will get another confirmation pop-up button or pop-up. To propose the assessment, just click on the Propose button, and that's basically it. When you do that, you've successfully submitted the proposal, and it's now time for the regional focal point to review the proposal. So in this section, after you propose the site, I will very briefly go over how the regional focal point will make comments on the proposal, and then we'll go back to how the proposer can interact with the regional focal point using the comments tool in the proposal portal of the WDKBA. So the first 3 slides are from the regional focal point's perspective, but most of the rest of it will be from the proposer's perspective. I will highlight when it's from the regional focal point's perspective and when it's from the proposer's perspective at the beginning. Yeah. So this is from the regional focal point's perspective. As soon as you click on the blue propose button, the proposal, and it's been proposed, the proposal status in the KBA assessment section or next to the KBA assessment word or wording will change from draft, which had a red dot associated with it, to proposed, which now has a blue dot associated with it. And I'm not sure how visible it is to my shared screen, but at this stage, all the fields will have been grayed out and are no longer editable. So no one can actually go in and make changes within the proposal. Also, on the top right of the website screen, you can see that there is a button. This button allows the regional focal points to invite external reviewers to review the proposal. The proposers themselves also have a similar button, but the proposers can only invite co-proposers to co-propose a site with them to fill in the information in the proposal, but not to actually review the proposal. Only the RFPs can invite individuals to be reviewers. So as I mentioned, this is still the regional focal points view of the proposal. And I would like to direct your attention to the 3 buttons at the bottom right of the screen. So first, there is the comments box in white with a blue border. This is where the reviewers, like the regional focal point, will be able to make comments by clicking on this box. On the right of that button is the red Return to Draft button. And then on the right of that is the Approve button. As I've just mentioned, the RFP will need to click on the the comments button to actually be able to make comments. And when they click on this comment box, a sidebar opens up that allows the regional focal point or the reviewer to make their comments while still viewing the information in this grayed out screen. So even when you have this open, the RFPs can actually scroll up and down on the grayed screen. They just can't actually write anything on it. So in this comment bar, the regional focal point will be able to select the field that they want to make a comment on, and then write their comments within the comment box. So, for example, the reviewer will first select the category. So in this case, let's assume that we select site description and rationale, and then they can type in their comment in the comment box. Once they've done this, they will need to click on the blue send or reply button to actually post the comment. If they don't think that if they realized that they made a mistake in their comments, then they can click on the cancel button to basically delete the comment. But if they do click on the blue button, then the comment has been posted. And they'll obviously have to do this multiple times as they go through the proposal. But one of the key points to keep in mind is that the comments made are shown in reverse chronological order. So the first comment that the reviewer made, in this instance, it was about site details, is the last comment that actually appears on this list of comments. So please keep that in mind. All the comments appear in reverse chronological order. So now we're back to the proposer's view of the proposed assessment. So in this screen, you will notice that there is only one button, the comments button, on the lower right end of the screen. This is because once the proposer has proposed the assessment, they can only view the details and interact with the regional focal point through the comments tool. The proposers cannot return the proposal to draft status, and they cannot approve of the proposal. And you will notice, like, again, the fields are all grayed out because, yeah, you can only interact with individuals through the comments tool. So you cannot actually make changes, any changes in the proposal itself. Yeah, so again, click on the comment box to view all the comments that the RFP and later the Secretariat have actually made in the proposal. At this point, like, if you have any additional clarification questions regarding the comments that the regional focal points are making, then you can click on the reply button for any of the comments and then type out your question or response to a question that the reviewer has made. So, for instance, if you want to respond to the comment at the top, which is related to the threats present at the site, all you'll need to do is basically click on the reply button. When you do that, a comment box will appear below it. Then you can make your comment in that box, and then again post it by clicking the blue send button. And you can see that the comment has been posted. The regional focal point will be able to view your reply as well. Yeah, and at this stage, I would like to say that responding to the comments that the regional focal point made is optional. You do not have to do this, but it could be a good time to read the comments and ask clarifying questions if you have any doubts about the comments that the regional focal point has made. This is just so that you can start thinking about how to actually address their comments within the proposal. And then finally, once the regional focal point has made all their comments, they will return the proposal assessment to you. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, the regional focal point can either approve the assessment or return to draft. If they have comments, oh, sorry, so this is from the regional focal points perspective, by the way, I forgot to mention that. So yeah, like they can either approve of the assessment or return to draft. If they have any comments that they want or need you to address, then they will obviously select return to draft. And then doing this will revert the proposal status to draft again. And you can see this reflected on your site list as well. And if you click on the, so here, the KBA site test was the one that had been proposed, and now it's been reverted back to draft. And then if you click on the ellipses at the right end of the screen on that row, then you will see that there are two options now. You can either edit the proposal, or you can remove it, basically delete it. Clicking on the edit button, as the name suggests, will allow you to actually address the comments that the regional focal point has made within the proposal. So when you click on the edit button, it brings you back to the first page of the proposal. And you can see on the top of the website screen that the status of the assessment is back to draft with a red button. This means that the fields are editable again. So you can now make changes to the proposal based on the comments that the regional focal point has made. However, I would like to point out two things here. First, currently, the system is not able to let you edit the fields within the proposal when the comment box is open. So, as you can see here, this proposal is in draft status. However, when the comments tool is open, the rest of the screen is grayed out and cannot be edited. This means that you will need to come up with a system to note down the comments so that you can address them once you close the comment box. So here I would say you need to, the system needs to be something that you are most comfortable with. So for instance, if you wanted, you could copy all the comments onto a Word document or an Excel file, whichever one you find easier, and then split screen so that you can view both the comments and edit the fields in the proposal. Alternatively, and this might actually be easier for everyone, you could also open the same site in two windows and view just the comments in one window, which would take like 25 to 30% of the screen, and then edit the fields in the second window, which could take 75 to 70% of the screen. The second thing that I would like to point out is that you cannot actually reply to the regional focal points comments when the proposal is in draft status. So the benefit of the draft status is that you can actually go in and make changes within the proposal. However, the negative is that you can no longer respond or communicate with the RFP through the comments tool. You have to be in proposed or nominated state to be able to reply to the comments. Okay, so with that, let's continue. So in this webinar, I'll be going over how to address the first comment that you can see here. This comment is about the About page, and it basically is pointing out that these consultation fields are empty and need some information, and the regional focal point has also asked or mentioned how they would want this information to be displayed. So the regional focal point made a comment about needing to address information in the consultations field and adding headings that categorize the groups of individuals that the proposer consulted. To address this comment, I wrote some information in these consultation fields. And as you can see in the biodiversity knowledge holders field, there are at least 3 categories of people. So there are 5 members of the scientific community. There are 2 government officials and 2 local residents that you can see that were consulted in the process. And then under each category, I wrote down their names and their email addresses of the relevant individuals who were consulted. This way, we can make sure that all the people who contributed to the development of the proposal can potentially be contacted if there is a need to do so. However, having said that, please make sure that the people whose names and contact details you list here have given you their permission to do so. In the next field, previous proposers, I wrote down not applicable since this is a new site proposal. If it was a reassessment in which you were significantly changing the boundary of the site, then you would also need to consult with the previous proposers. And so here you would basically say something along the lines of previous proposer, name of previous proposer were consulted, we had discussions about these sort of things, and then we came to these decisions. That's basically the justification of how you involve the previous proposer in the reassessment. Yeah, so these are just examples. Once you have addressed all the comments made by the reviewer, you can click on the blue Propose Assessment button again to send the proposal back to the regional focal point. And there may be some back and forth between you and the regional focal point regarding the comments and updating the fields in the proposal, but this is the regional focal point's perspective again, by the way. But once all the comments have been addressed adequately, the regional focal point will approve of the assessment by clicking on the blue Approve button. And once they have approved of the site, you can see that its status in your list of sites changes to reviewed by RFP. And then the accompanying dot is now a light green. And since your site this site has been approved, you will now either be able to view the comment or review the comment, or sorry, not comment, review the assessment, or you will be able to nominate the site to the Secretariat. And once again, when you click on the Nominate Assessment button, you will get a confirmation pop-up. When you click on Nominate again, you will have officially nominated the site. And this changes and this change in status is reflected in the assessment column as well. So the light green dot with the words reviewed by RFP has been replaced by an orange dot with the word nominated next to it. And if you were to view the nominated field, you can see the status of the document is reflected here as well. This site has been nominated. And again, once again, the fields are not editable, have been grayed out. Okay, so once your site has been nominated, what next? So this one I'm going to go over very, very briefly because the process is very similar to the review stage. In the nomination stage, the Secretariat will validate the information that you provided in the proposal. So the main actors now are the proposers and the Secretariat. So as I mentioned, the Secretariat will now review the proposal and validate the information that you have provided. So if they have any comments or concerns, they will make the relevant comments and in the relevant sections and then send the proposal back to you. Then you will have to address their concerns before you can move on to the next stage. As I mentioned at the very beginning, at this stage, the issues that the Secretariat raises are most likely going to be issues that you may already have discussed and resolved with the regional focal point, but just forgot to document within the proposal. So I've mentioned this a couple of times, but please make sure that whenever you have a discussion about an issue with the regional focal point, that you document the results and how you resolve the issue within the proposal so that the process goes a lot smoother and faster. But that's basically it for the main aspects of the KBA review process through the WDKBA. In the next section of this session, I'll basically just go over some of the common issues that we've come across in proposals and refer you to the appropriate reference documents. So as I just mentioned, I'm just going to go over common issues across multiple proposals. And again, the reason that I will be making references to specific chapters of documents, as well as the Proposing KBAs webinar, is because we just do not have the time to go over all of that in a lot of detail today, right now. Please note that the published documents will, of course, have much more detailed guidance and have much more information on how to actually deal with fringe issues. So the top 3 common issues or themes of issues that we've come across are mapping standards, site texts, and biodiversity elements. In terms of mapping standards, when you are delineating the site and before you submit the shapefiles, please ensure that the projection that you are using is aligned with the KBA standard projection. This information is available in a lot of our documents as well, but the projection that we use is WGS 84, and for latitudes and longitude, we use decimal degrees. The reason we're highlighting, or the reason I'm highlighting this right now, is that the use of different projections can lead to accuracy issues, which will delay the confirmation of the site as a KBA. So as you can see in this figure, when there are accuracy issues, so let's look at the bottom left figure. When there are accuracy issues, the KBA, the location on the map doesn't actually match the location in the world. And so when we see that the proposed site is sort of doesn't quite fit the projection that we can see of the globe, this will lead to delays in confirming the site, because this is a fairly large issue. Your site isn't where you're saying the site is. So please make sure that you're using the WGS 84 projection, and it may be called by different names in different software, so I'm not going over too much detail in that. And please make sure that you are using decimal degrees for latitudes and longitudes of the site. In terms of the precision, in some areas you may be able to zoom in quite a bit, especially if it's in urban areas, but in rural areas or wilderness areas, you may not be able to get a very fine resolution of the maps. So please make sure that the site is as precisely delineated as possible for that area. Another thing that I'd like to stress is sites that are close to urban areas or developments will need to be mapped to a high degree of precision, because there will be very little or no buffer between human activities and its impact on the site. However, sites that are in the middle of the wilderness may be able to get a bit more leeway, especially when there is some buffer between human activities and impact on site. Also, please check that the site area calculations are correct and aligned with the rest of the proposal before submitting it. And for more details on any of the things that I've just mentioned, please refer to Chapter 7 of the KBA Guidelines, version 1.2. The link is basically the link to the KBA, this particular version of the KBA Guidelines, and the guidelines on KBA Proposal Process. Again, this link will allow you to download that straight away onto your computer. We do also have a QGIS tutorial available in our website. available in our website. And if you would like the link to that resource, please let me know, and I will post the link in the a chat at the end of the session. The second common issue are in the site texts. So in proposing KBA's webinar, I went over the details on how to write each of the site texts that are bolded here: the site description, rationale, KBA identification, manageability, and site delineation. These bolded texts will appear in the site fact sheet, so will need to be written for the general public, since anyone can access and read these site fact sheets. If you have any questions on how to write or structure the bolded site texts, please first refer to the Proposing KBA's webinar, the recording. As I mentioned, it is available in our YouTube channel. Because today I will basically just be going over the additional details field only. So the additional details field is optional and should only include additional information that will be helpful when reviewing the document. Information that you include in this field will not be accessible to the general public. So for instance, if this site proposal or reassessment is linked to another KBA site, because either they have like overlapping boundaries or they are flush against each other and somehow they affect each other, then you can include that information in this additional details field. This is because the assessment of this site may be partially dependent on the assessment of the second or linked site. So if you flag which site is linked to this, the main site that the reviewer is reviewing, then we can review the two sites together. However, if this information is not flagged, and we realize that this site is linked, or this site is linked to another site at a later date, then we would have to review the two sites together again. Even though the two might have been assessed individually, now we would have to reassess both sites together to cross-check the information available. So that could result in delays in the review and nomination processes. Similarly, if you're using localities as the assessment parameter for a lot of your trigger elements, then you may need to provide justifications for selecting localities as your assessment parameter. You can do this in the additional information field as well. However, because there are only a few locations where you can provide the additional details or additional information, please make sure that when you are writing information in these fields, that you include the appropriate heading, just to help guide and streamline the review process. So instead of having all the information in one really large paragraph, if you have headings that categorize the different types of issues, then when the regional focal point or the secretariat are reviewing the document, they know exactly which part of the additional information to refer to for different parts of the proposal. And then finally, the third common issue tends to be related to the biodiversity elements. Before submitting the proposal, please check that the global and site estimates are as accurate as possible. If you are using data that goes against current understanding, so for instance, and I've used this example multiple times, you're using data that isn't available in the red list yet, then you will need to clearly justify the use of that data. And even though it may seem obvious to you why you're using that data, please articulate your reasonings in the proposal so that the reviewers that could be the RFP, the external reviewers, and or the Secretariat, are able to access your reasoning and thought process and understand exactly why you made the decisions that you did. We've also come across issues in the reproductive units and mature individuals fields. I'm not going to go over these in too much detail because, again, as I mentioned earlier, I did sort of mention some of these issues in the Proposing KBAs webinar. And if you want more detailed guidance, then you can also refer to the KBA guidelines, specifically chapters 2 and 9. And the last thing that we'll go over today before ending is how to package the information in the WDKBA proposal portal. So finally, here is the list of materials that you will need to submit to propose a KBA. So first, you will need to prepare the proposal online through the WDKBA. You will also have to create a zip file with 2 folders, where one folder has the relevant GIS files, shape files, and the second folder, which is more optional, could include key supporting documents that do not have a link. So to go back to the example that I've been referring to throughout, this could be approval of the population data that you submitted to the relevant red list authority for one of your trigger elements to support your use of new data that is not currently reflected on the red list. So once you, with these 3 documents ready to go, once you submit the proposal online, you can email this zip file with the 2 folders to the regional focal point, and then later to the Secretariat so that they can review all the relevant information together. Right, so, oh yeah, sorry, one thing I forgot to mention is the reason why the review process is broken down into review and nomination stages are because different people have different strengths and different, so things that are lost in, or things that aren't picked up during the review stage can be picked up during the nomination stage. So just keep that in mind as well. In the nomination stage, we won't only be picking on information that the RFP has already picked on. There may be some new issues that come up as well. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask away. The QR code on the slide is to the feedback survey. I will be posting a link to the survey in the chat as well, and you can use either of them to give your feedback. And now I'm just going to stop sharing screen so that I can copy paste some of the links that I referenced into the chat. Okay, I'm gonna